After a night of violence in 1971, when 6 people were killed in the area, scores of Catholic and Protestant families were forced to leave their homes in one of the last mixed streets in West Belfast, Springfield Park. In the optimism of the 1960s, they had bought new houses there, creating a peaceful and tolerant community, only to find themselves at the heart of a 3-way battle when the Troubles broke out. Filmed in 1998, A Million Bricks was a testimony to that scattered community, told by the people themselves and directed and produced by Frank Martin and SEAMUS KELTERS, who as children had lived in Springfield Park. They managed to trace many of the original residents and persuaded them to tell their stories on camera. Here were ordinary people who had seen their hopes realised, then dashed within the space of a decade. Where once stood a row of houses shared by Protestants and Catholics, now stood Belfast's biggest peace line, a wall of 1 million bricks, separating them. Here is no man's land. Here was home. This independent documentary was made possible by Northern Vision's Belfast Community Video Awards scheme, Hometown. These were production awards for new and established filmmakers to explore an aspect of Belfast life in an original way. They had a very small budget of £3,000 and free use of Northern Vision's facilities. Without the Hometown scheme, this documentary may never have been made. 1 Million Bricks was premiered at the Belfast Waterfront Hall, bringing together many of the original residents for the first time in over 25 years, and broadcast on Ulster Television, UTV. It was very well received in the local press and later screened at the Cork Film Festival, QFT Belfast, and the Made in Northern Ireland Filmmakers Showcase in New York City. The film was also nominated for the Belfast Arts Award of 2000. Now, on Nvtv, another opportunity to watch the documentary, 1 Million Bricks.
In 1957, the first bricks of nearly 130 houses were laid at the foot of Divis Mountain. The people that moved here came mainly from the Shankill and the Falls, mostly young families willing to ignore the divisions of the city below for the dream of owning a semi-detached house with garden front and back. Springfield Park was West Belfast's last religiously mixed development. It wasn't planned that way. People were simply buying the best houses they could afford. Street directories of the time show Catholics and Protestants lived as neighbours, prison officers side by side with priests. They were ordinary people, plumbers, joiners, bricklayers, milkmen, machinists, fitters, all wanting away from the terraced rows where they grew up. 2 identities, 1 street. Springfield Park today, a generation older. From one perspective, it looks a normal street. But this is the very edge of West Belfast's sectarian fault line. A row of houses has been replaced by a wall of 1 million bricks. Only Catholics live here now. Protestants are on the other side of the peace line. But for the original residents, it was one community and a new beginning. This was my community. In fact, it was the last community I ever really felt a part of. It was scattered by one of the worst gun battles of the Troubles. People were driven back behind sectarian lines. Many of them never saw each other again. I wanted to make this programme to tell their story. The people who lived here before this peace wall was built. The people who had a better use for 1 million bricks.
My name is Bobby Clark. I lived at 60 Springfield Park.
Peggy Irwin. I lived at 61 Springfield Park.
My name is Jim Kelters. Number 69, Springfield Park.
I'm Margaret Tully.
I'm Tom Tully.
I lived in 71 Springfield Park.
I'm Molly Martin.
I'm John Martin, and I lived at 73 Springfield Park.
I'm Andy Ellis.
And I'm Sarah Ellis.
And we lived in 82 Springfield Park.
My name's Jerry McCaffrey.
My name's Margaret McCaffrey, and we lived in 84 Springfield Park.
I'm Jackie Burns, and I lived at 86.
Ellen Burns, 86 Springfield Park.
Paddy Brown, 120 Springfield Park.
I'm Eddie Withers.
And I'm Caroline Withers, and we used to live in 122 Springfield Park.
I'm Dorothy Henry.
I'm Jim Henry, and we lived at 124 Springfield Park.
I'm Ruby O'Neill.
I'm Paddy O'Neill, and we live at 63 Springfield Park.
My name's Frank Martin, and I used to live at 73 Springfield Park. Moving to Springfield Park in 1965 was a big step for my parents, John and Molly Martin. I was the eldest of their 5 children. There were 8 kids by the time we left the street. With its gardens and fields, it was paradise for us. It seemed a world away from where we began.
Cape Street, I come from Cape Street.
I came from Murray Street, Falls Road. It's a small kitchen house, just an outside toilet.
Oh, I'm a plumber of trade, and I work in the shipyard and on different sites in it.
Other young couples were also looking for a new start. Coming from terrace streets, these semi-detached houses were not only the limit of their horizon, they were the extension of their dreams.
I seen this hunk in the plaza. I remember looking at him. There was a big clock. I'm sure all the oldies like myself will remember it. I looked up and he looked into my eyes. And
there just was that, I suppose for a modern day word, if you said it in them days, that a chemistry. What to talk about in the 90s.
Well, I was basically a seaman. In the area, you had 2 functions there. You had Air Sea Rescue and Marine Craft section, as they call it.
You went to dances and you weren't out looking for somebody that was in the forces. Like, I mean, I never knew that he had been in the Air Force. He was on his civvies, you know. Belfast to me, it was booming because Derry, okay, Derry's a great big place, but there's more in Belfast. When I used to come up, I used to love coming to Belfast.
There was plenty of work going there in the shipyard. Michelin Tire Factory was going, Mackey's was going in, and half of Belfast must have been on the buses at one time or another. You name it, Belfast was going in, all right.
I came out of my time when I was 21. At that time I was earning £6.10 or £6.50. And the very next week I was earning, I'll never forget this figure the Lord calls me, £13 6 and 4 pence halfpenny. That was the rate. And to Sarah and I, that was a fortune.
Before we came out of the area, it was always our ambition to buy a house. So I had the deposit saved up, lucky enough.
And that more than made us able to make the transition from a 1 up, 1 down to a 3 up, 2 down.
We were in a terrace house, and well, it was in your street, and the way they were building them, you had to pick them off a plan.
When we first inquired about the houses, they were £1,875, and I hadn't fully decided then, and inside 2 weeks it went up to £2,075, so we thought we'd better buy it now.
I suppose in today's values you're talking about £60,000–70,000 house, semi-detached house, brand new, space for a garage, garden front and rear.
To move up to a house that had a bathroom, sitting room, 3 bedrooms, I mean, you're talking big time here.
We found it a difference from, it was a sort of an increase in electricity, and it was all electric, and but you got by. We got by all right.
It was only £2,000, but it was an awful lot of money then. You know, with me, it was buying a house or buying a car. So you bought the house, you couldn't have a car, but you had a house sort of thing.
White Rock and New Barnsley, around that area, was built up then, and the Black Mountain was my attraction. It was beautiful, it was beautiful. Gardens, you know, you never seen a garden in Saunders Street, you didn't see a garden in Sandy Row, And you definitely didn't see one up a Shankill, so I mean, this was a new life, a whole new beginning.
We went to Brian Morton's, as he was a sailing agent, and I remember very well bringing my car keys out of my pocket and setting them on the desk just to try and create an impression that I had a car. Nowadays, a car it's like a can of beans, it's nothing. But in them days, if you had a car, well, people sort of looked at you were that wee bit better off.
Andy sold the car. His mummy helped us out, and she was so proud that her son was used to say, "My son lives in 82 Springfield Park." And to her, that was upper class.
Well, whenever we moved up to Springfield Park, we had 5 children, but I thought it was great, you know, with the 2 reception rooms and the 2 fires and the big garden for the children. I was only in it 5 weeks, never had another baby.
That's when you really got to know people, because they stopped you to ask what had you and what'd you get, and then you started getting to know people. You know, before that, we were going out to work in the mornings, not coming home until night. But once I had Ronan, then you sort of, you know, everybody was coming out to ask, "Oh, what did you get?" You know, and it was great from there on, you know.
Whoever had their baby first then was sort of an old hand when the next one came along, and you did this for homemade remedies got rid of teething problems, colic, whatever the case may be.
Tony next door had Hughes's bread fan, which was only a wee part for the driver to sit in. And Andy went run next door. Sarah's waters broke, and they got me in this wee part of the van. It was a wee space here, and Tony was here, and Andy was somewhere crouched at the back of me, and we were going down Springfield Park, and Tony says, "Don't you bleeping have this baby in this van?" And he was panicking driving, and he couldn't get me to the doctors quick enough. It was Dr. Laird's, and I think when he got to Dr. Laird's, he was really ready for passing out.
But even paradise had its problems.
Well, I think the row came mostly after we all moved in, where you expected after a few weeks or that you'd at least have a road or a footpath to go down, and that didn't materialise. So, you know, you went on with it for a while, and you spoke to the builder about it, and you were promised this and promised that. Nothing came of it until we eventually all protested so that he would do something, at least give us a road to walk up or a footpath to walk up.
There were foundations of houses half built. There were houses up with roofs and that on them, but not completely completed, and you could let your imagination run wild in all of these things. And better than any playground that you'd have today, any modern playground. Well, probably very dangerous. I mean, today you wouldn't be allowed anywhere near these things, but they seemed fascinating to us as children and occupied most of your time.
Any kids that went to school, they were up and down in dumper trucks carrying bricks. You just sent them out in their water boots every morning because the roads weren't finished, and now you get in it.
I can remember one day at the door, this wee figure standing, and a red face, and it was our Andy, and he was just covered in blood where he had fell off one of the jumpers.
Whoever was doing the local building had left 4 or 5 flagstones up against the fence of our house. I pulled one, Lanton one pulled it away with my hand, and then being a complete idiot, I put my hand underneath it to stop it hitting the ground, which of course it continued to hit the ground and take 2 of my fingers almost with it.
The kids were the initial contact, because, you know, our kids played with other kids and you found out who they were, and then you found out who their parents were, and that way the associations were struck up.
You know, we did get on well together, you know. Jerry McCaffrey and Richard and myself, John Stewart, Andy would have been out in the street kicking football, and the kids would have been there kicking too, you know. But then Jerry had been playing for me in turn out there, like it was special, you know, not only for the kids, special for us as well, playing with professional football, you know.
I played centre forward, it's called striker now. Also played on the wing, which they've done away with. They don't have wingers, they have wing backs and what have you now, but I would have been outside right, outside left, centre forward, and then eventually midfield.
I went to the Distillery matches with John Stewart, and went to the Glentown matches with Billy Taylor.
because McCaffrey played for Distillery and then he got transferred to Glens.
In winter it was beautiful. The kids couldn't get enough of the snow, and in many ways Springfield Park escaped the sectarian chill of the city below.
It was a community just starting out, getting to know each other, getting to know each other's ways, making friends with your neighbours on either side of you and in the wider community too.
It was a mixed street, but it didn't bother me at all. I'd been used to go up and visit an Eilish in the lower end, and she had plenty of Protestant neighbours.
When our Jackie took an appendicitis, they fell up the street. They were Protestants, and he came down and took him away to the hospital for us. No problem. So he did. And then when I was pregnant, he took me to the hospital as well. And I just made it there. He was terrified in case the had been born in his car. He kept his car immaculate, and he was afraid of anything happening to it. And Joan says to me, I think Billy would have had a heart attack if you had had that child in the car. That was Billy, Taylor and Joan.
Carl and Eddie actually got us interested in camping because Eddie saw some advert in one of the English papers for a tent and all of the beds and everything for 50 quid, and we thought, oh, we'll have a go at that.
The first weekend we went away, we all went to Tullymore and camped side by side with Caroline and Eddie and the children. The priest, Father Mullen, they were going to build a new church down in Spring Hill, so we decided we'd have sort of tea parties in our own homes and invite all of the neighbours, and they would all pay, sort of say, maybe 5 shillings and come, and you supplied all the food, and it was just really a wee social get-together. And like even Caroline come to that, even though she wasn't of the same persuasion.
The first 12th of July, we lived up there. We didn't have a car, and I was a wee bit sceptical. What will we do? But we just put the children's wee flags and sort of shopping bag and their wee collarettes, or we will let the children walk down the park with them in their hands, because we didn't want to offend anyone, and we didn't want to look offensive or to be look bold. But what we just wanted to do was retain our identity, and as we let others retain their identity.
I used to take John and Richard dressed in a sash and a Union Jack, me and Andy, down Springfield Park on the 12th day, and nobody said a word. Everybody just waved out the window or whatever.
As kids, we were more interested in what was on TV. A world of Daleks, Thunderbirds and World Cup heroes. British culture, American culture, not a lot of Irish. And because of our toys, I was more familiar with their history than I was with our own. And then, some real live Americans came to fascinate the street.
The Browns, they lived just 2 doors below us, and Michael Brown actually was American. His wife was from here, so they decided to come back when he retired from, I think it was the Air Force he was in, that's right. And he came back with all his children, but he was very funny. He'd had a few coronaries and had to take things easy. And they always used to go down to Woolworths in Belfast and buy all their groceries for the month and get them delivered. And we thought this was really big time, you know, because we could really just afford to go once a week and get our shopping.
School was, basically enjoyable, but I think American accents, had it, I was primary 3 or 4 when it started. And I remember getting hair tugged because I talked funny, wore funny clothes and things like that there. But that's just soon wore off and it just got adopted into the community, I feel like.
It was a beautiful setting. Our window, when you come down the stairs in the morning, you just, especially in summertime, you looked up and the Black Mountain was just behind you, and it was like a picture just in the time I climbed it.
We all had gardens, which no one was too keen on, but the summer was the time when you made an effort to get them into shape, but of course everybody helped everybody else. Yeah. So there was a lot of talking done, not an awful lot of work, but it was a good time, the clear nights. It was 11 and half 11 when you were coming in at night with maybe half an hour's work done, but the rest of the time was spent yarning.
We had the tenants committee. It was one of these charters, non-sectarian, non-political, to try and
let people know that we're a tenants association looking after the people who we were representing.
We knew that as a committee, any functions that we run, the residents backed them up. We always had everybody going to any functions.
The old dances are especially old years night, like you had a dinner dance and everybody was having a swally, like. I don't ever remember anybody ever fighting.
We had a hard out of hall downtown, and everybody got geared up the way we went and had a really good night. That was it. It was an extension really of Springfield Park downtown.
And I can remember all the style at that time. There were dusty Springfield tight boots, the white boots that were tight up their short skirts, and oh, for heaven's sake, everybody was film stars, all turned out in their best.
The space program was had such an impact that we had our own spaceship inside our own cloakroom, where the three boys would have went in, and an imaginary space flight which would have beaten anything in Star Trek. This would have lasted hours.
But of course then the Iron Curtain was still going on, and all the Russian films, the spies, and the Berlin Wall. That was different. That could never happen in Northern Ireland. You would never put a wall up in Northern Ireland.
When I was a kid, I used to stand on the steps of our house in Springfield Park, and I used to look up at the Black Mountain. I remember thinking, one day I'm going to climb that, get us far enough up the mountain where we could look back on our city. Now looking back there, a wall of 1,000,000 bricks dominates the local landscape, separating Springfield Park and Spring Martin. And when we were kids, houses stood on that spot and flats looked down on them. But even then, Springfield Park was becoming squeezed by the sectarian geography of Belfast.
I had the front garden beautifully done, and just had got the back garden in order, and the seed was just coming up when the trouble started.
Well, that morning it had came on the news, and I had to go to work, but there wasn't any transport on or anything like that. Decided to walk to work, and walked down the road. When we came to Bombay Street, you actually realised how bad that it was, and went down to see it. And I actually couldn't go to work because I was so upset and totally. I was totally horrified.
There was things taking place I wasn't happy with. I was getting a bit frightened. My opinions never changed of the people. Their attitude towards us never changed. But there was things happening in the province. You didn't have to be educated to know that there was going to be something. Turn out big.
After 69, 15th of August 69, I put my house up for sale because I thought, no, this is it. Couldn't stay here. I didn't really want to, for I still loved the house. But we put it up, but then took it down again because there was no sale going on.
There was an apprehension in places and things like that, but where we were in the park, it was a mixed community, and it didn't seem to interfere with anything that we were doing. We were still there. We were young couples doing our best to keep our jobs and pay the mortgage. And where we were, we seemed to be sort of isolated to a certain degree.
Ken Parr, he lived just about 2 doors on the other side from us, and he started out the Tenants Association. And he originally was from, I think, Bootle in Liverpool, and he obviously had met his wife over here. She was called Erin, and she was from the Shankill Road area. And all during the 1969 troubles, and there was a lot of debris on the road, and he would have walked to work every day in the tax office. Another person probably would have stayed at home because the roads were bad enough, but he couldn't see, but he still managed to get to his work every day.
It was a neighbour came and told there was an army Land Rover went up the street there, and I said, no, it couldn't be, but it did. And of course that became then the norm.
Oh, I went to work in the laundry, and the troubles had started, but not just too bad. But the laundry, they did the Army's personal laundry. And got to meet a few of the Army blokes coming in. Very nice. Everybody seemed to get on quite well.
Looking back, there were boys in uniform from that point of view, and I think they were faced with a situation as the probably their first taste of armed conflict, or if that was the case. So I think people try to make them at home or talk to them. Again, I think everybody did. From what I know, my immediate neighbours all around me would have chatted or given a glass of juice or a cup of tea or something like that. I never heard bitterness. I never heard bitterness in Springfield Park the whole time I was there.
The Army came into our street, and they were very, it was, I mean, the usual story, when they were welcomed in the street, and we were fascinated by their guns and their radio equipment, by the uniforms they wore. I mean, we had bought a lot of uniforms, kids' versions of their uniforms, a lot of guns and that sort of thing, and reenacted these people you saw in front of you. We didn't see very many paratroopers, so I don't know why we had paratroop uniforms. Maybe they're the only ones available. But the additions, if you like, which we had ourselves, the shields and attempts to even make perspex shields out of plastic and to have buttons and all, was undoubtedly sort of a reflection of what was going on around us. This is what you saw on TV.
The residents of Springfield Park were sort of starting to get worried about what was happening and going on, so the men decided, both Protestants and Catholics got together and they decided, well, we'll do a little detour every night.
Everybody in the street took turns. It didn't matter whether you're Protestant, Catholic or Jew or Gentile, you took control and you took your part and took your times, your allocated times that you went out and patrolled. You weren't doing anything bad, you were only trying to protect what we had. What we had was very good.
You know, through the night, from sort of 7 o'clock right through the night, 7 o'clock in the morning, and some would do the front of the road, some would do the back end of the road, and you'd meet up and cross in shifts, etc. You know, so that our women could sleep safely in their beds at night. That we were probably in the back of somebody's van sleeping half the night, you know. But and that was true.
Belfast was changing, and the religious makeup of the housing estates around the park had altered. The local Presbyterian church, the Henry Taggart Memorial Hall, was by 1970 an army base and a regular target for Republican youths from Ballymurphy. Overlooking Catholic Ballymurphy was the newly built Protestant Springmartin estate. People divided by 4 centuries of history and experience lived within 400 yards of each other. Sandwiched between them was Springfield Park.
The Orange men were coming up the Springfield Road, and there was a bit of a confrontation. Park's Bakery was there, and in actual fact it was burnt down that day. And by the time the Orange men got to our end of the road, they were a bit battered and bruised because they had been attacked.
Henry Taggart, which eventually ended up as a army barracks or something or other, that's where our youngest child was christened. When it was a church, and we went to that church, our oldest boy, he was going to the Vera Foster School. And then I think it was got kind of integrated. That didn't annoy us. Then the people started to move out of New Barnsley. And behind us they started to erect Springmartin. And then they started to feel kind of being squeezed from one side and from the other. And you got the feeling you have a jam on the sandwich here.
New Barnsley, when we first went, was virtually, I would have called it then a Protestant estate, although I wouldn't have used that term. And the other side of the road, being Ballymurphy, was a Catholic estate. And I well remember that the buses arrived because there was going to be armed conflict, and certain politicians did say that, you know, the Irish troops are forming up on the border and they're ready to come across. And 20 or 30 buses, maybe more, and lorries came and to New Barnsley to help them evict. And they were evicted. The Protestants evicted the Protestants, in my opinion. And that then probably turned, and within hours, the houses were occupied by people from the other persuasion. But that never happened in Springfield Park.
I don't think there was any, to my knowledge, that Springfield Park was, that I was threatened in Springfield Park. But I think it was more or less from Ballymurphy to Barnsley over to this Spring Martin estate. I think they were doing more to each other there than they actually were in Springfield Park.
Always the snatch squads were running into Ballymurphy, and we were standing, must have been about between 1:30 and 2 in the morning. A crowd of us were standing at the bottom of Springfield Park, and all of a sudden there was the army was up on Springfield Road on the left-hand side looking down at Ballymurphy, and all of a sudden there was this massive bang, and in the stillness of the night everything went dead quiet. And out of the silence came a voice shouting, "That shook yous." And naturally, when we didn't stay too long after that, when never knew what was going to happen.
This time when things were starting to look bad, we decided we would try and sell the house, and we had a for sale sign up, thankfully at that particular time. And I remember Sarah and the children and myself, we were up the stairs lying on the bedroom floor. And these rowdy people had discovered where we lived, and they were howling abuse at us and at the house. And this gentleman, this neighbour of ours, opening his bedroom window, this is way late at night, and shouting, "What's going on? What do these people want?" And they said we were looking for so-and-so. And this fella saying, "Okay, I've up sticks and gone. They're away." But he knew we weren't away. We were up our stairs, and we were trying to protect the children. And I never forgot that act that man took. And it got to the stage so bad, I had to go down to Springfield Road police station and ask for protection. And the police just simply said to me, "We can't give you 24-hour protection. Our best advice to you would be to evacuate your home."
We went down to the village to live in Rockview Street. There was no gardens, there was no mountains at the back of you to look at. We weren't there 2 months till Richard was taken into the hospital with dysentery, and 2 days later John took it. They were just back down to where, you know, where we first started. I would say even worse.
What transpired after we left, I can only but imagine and feel for the neighbours we left behind and sympathise with them for what they maybe had to endure or what they came through.
I think then you became very insular and were concerned about what was going on. Or, could I say, that little cul-de-sac in Springfield Park became very important to the people in it, and we used to sit and meet and talk still about what was going on. But yes, I would have said then that was the beginning of the end for the Springfield Park, which is what we knew.
The false sense of calm was swept away in one day, August the 9th, 1971, the introduction of internment.
I found out when I got up to go to work that morning, and the place was just chaotic. Alec Mitchell was the first one I met, and he told me that internment had been introduced. I gathered when I got up that something different had happened, you know, and Obviously there was no way that you could go to work. The buses were off. The Springfield Road was, it was like a battleground because there were gun battles going on between Ballymurphy and the Henry Taggart Hall.
A soldier told me that Mackey's, where I worked, was in flames, but when I got down, it wasn't actually. It was Campbell's, a glass. I think it was Campbell's, a glass place was burning, but we saw there was no possibility of going to work.
My wife and me went down to look for some food or something for the kids down on the Spring Hill. And when we got down, there was all this, you actually could have felt the atmosphere. It was tingling, it was like a fog. It was just a tension.
With the introduction of internment, 320 Catholic men were arrested and detained without trial, while the army became preoccupied with the Republican reaction from Ballymurphy. Loyalists used Spring Martin to attack Springfield Park.
I remember waking up, a rude awakening, you know, windows getting smashed and things like that. Crowd out Spring Martin, side of the road, crowds out there. I remember shouting and screaming. I can't remember what exactly was said.
I was expecting Stuart then. He was due to be born in August 1971. So it made life a wee bit more worrying, particularly for me at that stage with sort of being, you know, ready to have a baby then.
On the Springfield Road at the top of Spring Hill, the army were entrenched there, the RUC were there, hundreds of them, and we were sitting with nothing. And this crowd of maybe 100 or 150 throwing stones and getting aggravated, and you know, and sooner or later you knew it was only a matter of time before some hothead was going to do something one way or the other.
The bit that really annoyed me about it was that 2 RUC men stood on the Spring Martin Road the entire day and laughed and joked with crowds and seemed to be getting on really well with them and thought this was hilarious. And our houses were being wrecked. And you know, there's money coming out of my wages to help pay those people's wages, but they didn't seem to think that they had any responsibility towards me or towards the people that lived in Springfield Park.
Being the summer holidays then, different other ones were away on holiday, so Darry and Jim were away and some of the others were away, and you felt just a little bit more isolated.
We went down to the security forces. They says, look, for Christ's sake, what are you going to do? You're going to let these people up here destroy our houses and burn us out? And he says, got nothing to do with me. He says, the only bastards I meant to arrest them are the bastards down there. And he pointed into Spring Hill. And then I turned to the cop and I started on him. And his answer was, we're not allowed to cross the road. That's not our territory. That has got nothing whatsoever to do with us. And of course, a couple of us verbally abused him and they threatened to put us in jail. He says, any more out of you fellas and we'll throw you into Springfield Barracks. He says, now you can pick up your mind or you're going to stand here or you'll be lifted and put into Springfield Barracks. And we just said, well, if that there is your answer, then that's it. You're more interested in keeping those people in there and protecting the people up here. We are people who are living in our own houses. We've bought these houses. They're our security for the rest of our lives, and you're telling us we don't count.
Well, the way I looked at it was, I had a house full of kids, and well, the last thing I wanted was my kids and my wife and kids among me at that time. When you're on your own, my motto was, you look out for number one. When you're on your own, I didn't have to worry about my kids being there, anybody else. If hardy come to hardy, you get yourself into scrapes. My wife wasn't that happy about it. But this time, I just said, that's it. It's just getting too serious.
We had to get all the children and put the youngest in the pram and try and put baby food and everything, stuff the pram up with that, and go over to Grantia. We had to have the pram lifted over barricades and everything from the White Rock Road, you know, because the youngest baby was only 7 months then.
Close to where my aunt lived, and there was a lorry burning, and I remember my mother saying, we've made the wrong decision here. You know, we were okay where we were, and this looks much worse.
But we just made it no more till Grand Chagrin. And if we got into her house, there was a bomb went off at the top of High Street. We were only into it a couple of minutes.
There was a huge explosion where a landmine of some description went off at the top of the street, and 2 or 3 houses on top of the street had been very badly damaged. And us all rushing out into the street to see what this was. And this seemed to confirm the idea that this was a ludicrous move. We'd been far safer staying where we were.
The neighbours came run down and said, the park is under attack up at the back. So we dropped everything and ran up the park.
And I saw a crowd up at where the wee shortcut was, up just where Albert Fusco lived. And as I went to make my way down, the stones, it was just like hailstones that come over.
I was coming up a park, and some woman in the park, I can't remember who it is now in my haste, handed me a cardboard box with empty bottles in it. And I remember lifting it off her, okay, and I was running up and I was saying, what am I going to do with these? I thought maybe she had the idea for to throw them to keep, you know, and I suppose that was in my mind too. But I ran up the park and Father Mullins stopped me. He said, Tom, what are you doing? Is this the right thing? And I said, Father, I don't know what you're talking about. I am living in my own street and we are under attack. We're not attacking anybody. I said, we're defending here. And I said, with bottles. And anyway, Father, I haven't time to talk to you. I'll talk to you about this again.
I was taken out at the back of the house on the Monday night, not in imminent giving birth, but obviously distressed at the time about things, and taken, actually it was the soldiers, the paratroop regiment, that sort of got me out at the time, and went from there to my mother's and then on into hospital, because the hospital, or the doctor, was concerned at my condition.
I just remember one big mad crowd coming up. We were in our own house in our garden, weren't allowed out the back, but we got tucked down the alley. We're actually in Fusco's house. We went down their front path over there back into McNulty's.
There were 3 lorries, and I saw police and army along with a crowd, but they didn't try to stop them.
In fact, the police and army arrived and just stood there in the house and let them get on and doing what they're doing. Thought it was better. Maybe it was. Maybe they didn't want a riot in their hands.
We had to go up to help evacuate the Malays because they had a lot of kiddies. Barney couldn't see well, and his wife obviously needed assistance, so we got those out. But when we were getting them out, their house was actually being wrecked from the back while we were taking them out the front. And the same was happening with all the houses up along that backed onto Spring Martin.
The crowd, I think they're all from Ballymurphy, or a lot of them from Ballymurphy, and that's when the two sides started just battles and stones. I remember one man, we got sort of overrun. They started running down the alleyway, and there's one man with a gun. He started shooting, and that dispersed them, which initially allowed us to get out of the street altogether up to some sort of community centre in Moyard.
Caught in this little area, one mob shooting wasn't good enough, then they tried to get at each other, so they had to cross the area where we lived, and the one way that they had to do was go through my driveway in my garden to get to the area. It was in direct line, and I can remember coming out and hearing the noise and asking, you know, very brave, asking, you know, 30 or 5 or 40 yobs, where do you think you're going? Only to be met with a hail of stones. And maybe if I hadn't gone out, they wouldn't have touched the house. I'd remember, maybe so, I don't know. But that's when they then decided to come into the house and have a go.
Some of the crowd from Spring Martin Road came down into the fields and were actually at the back of our houses, and they were throwing bricks and bottles over the roof, and they were coming down on the front steps. So we were in the house, but we couldn't get out.
And between this 30 or 40 people in the house, taking, I was taking stuff out what I could carry out the back door, and they were carrying everything else out the front door.
And then there was a lull, and Jerry and Jackie Burns says, right, run now, Margaret.
And I was then put over the back fence by the police into my brother-in-law's car.
But I was running down Springfield Park with Leanne in my arms, and Margaret's mum was in front of me. And I actually didn't hear the shot, but I felt the wind whistling past me, and I felt the stinging in my shoulder, and it pitched me forward. And I remember pulling the baby into me so that it wouldn't be hurt.
We were upstairs looking out, and I noticed Jerry McCaffrey running down the street. I think he had one child under his arm, another by the hand, and he was running. There was a sound of gunfire, and he went down. I thought he'd been hit, so I ran downstairs to go out and help him.
But I just simply did a forward roll and came back up on my feet again.
And I felt the sting of shotgun pellets hitting me on the right-hand side. Jerry, I think, got the burst across the back, for he was running towards me. And I said, "Jerry, you hit me." He shouts to me, "Run, run." And I turned to run, and my wife, who was standing at the door, looking to see where I was, Jerry, as he rolled over trying to protect the child, he dropped the shawl. My wife, she shouted, "The shawl, the shawl." And I run back to get the shawl in the middle of shooting. After it was done on the spur of the moment, wasn't any bravery, but I mind getting hit in the rear end again with some shotgun pellets, you know, as I was turning my back to run back.
So I ran up, and I took about a 9-month-old child from people, and I advised them to move out, similar to I had done with the wife. I carried the child out across the field, through my back garden, down across the river, up the bit of a hill and across the field, and brought the child over to my yard. Somebody took the child off me, and they were going to organise a party to help evacuate the rest of the people out, and I went back across the field.
And the process of taking people down through the back, as Spring Martin had been built, there was 2 blocks of flats at the bottom, and I remember seeing 3 figures in military uniform, you know, the camouflage. Whether they were army, whether they were loyalist, paramilitary, I don't know, but the 3 of them had rifles.
As I was running across the field in the first place with a child, I noticed on the roofs of Spring Martin, soldiers on the apex of the roof, and they had watched me going across.
The field was on a slope, so if you got right up to the back of it, you were sort of concealed from Spring Martin. You could go along the back of the field. So we started to make our way along the back of it to get to my yard, but it was at this stage we had just got into the field, and I happened to glance towards Spring Martin, and the paratroopers were in Spring Martin. They were lined along the Spring Martin road, and they commenced firing.
So I tried to zigzag, and the next thing was I was knocked flat where I'd been shot.
We grabbed a wee suitcase, and that suitcase I dropped it going over the fields, and there was nappies in it because I had a young one then. He was only 2 months, and I had 6 kids then, you know. And the eldest daughter, she was hanging on to some of them. They was hanging on to some, you know, and you didn't know what was going to happen.
So I tried to move my toes and found I could move my toes, move my fingers, and knew I wasn't paralysed. And I called out to a couple of neighbours who were over in the field near the back of their own houses that I had been hit. They came over to me. One lad put his shirt over my back. We sent then to get the priest in. Father Mullen came over to me, and he anointed me, and I said I was all right, Father, I wasn't going to die, and he said, "I'll do it anyway." So he anointed me, and then he turned to ring for an ambulance for me. So Father Mullen went out with this lad towards the phone. Now, the lad was walking upright, but Father Mullen, he was down virtually on one knee, waving a white hanky. And as he was going out, he must have been about 20, 30 yards from me when another burst of gunfire, and I heard him scream. And then shortly after that, there was another burst of gunfire, and the lad beside him seemed to get hit as well on the foot. And Father Mullen was hit again. And his screams got lower, and it was just, I'd say about 15 minutes, there was no more sound. I reckon he was dead at that time.
We got near the edge of the field, had taken the 2 children off me, and these 2 fellas shouted, "Mrs. Run," and I couldn't.
During the gunfire, Henry Taggart had been attacked, and all of a sudden there was gunfire everywhere. I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that the very ground that we were lying on was like trembling with the bullets that were flying about. They were coming at us, and the lad beside me who had put a shirt over my back jerked up in the air and back down again. I knew from the expression of his face that lad was dead. Turned out to be a lad called Frank Quinn. I think he was only 19.
I was frozen to the spot, and they kept shouting, "Mrs, you have to run." And I mean, there was bullets flying past me. And all I could think of was, didn't think of Jerry or the kids, but here, I said, this must be what it's like to die, because I'm going to die here. But I didn't cry or nothing, you know, just very, very frightened. And the two fellas, they say, run out and just lift at me.
My brother, Gerald, had been lying beside me, and I suggested that the grass was long in the field. It was the 9th of August. It was like hay, and that we would try to slide back through the grass because we were exposed and our position was spotted, and that's where they were shooting at. So we slid backwards through the grass, and then we came under fire from Ballygomartin Road, across Finley's car park. We'd hear the sound of the gunfire and then the bullets zipping through the grass just above us. And we lay there until it got dark, about 10:30.
And we had to crawl up the field. So we did. And when we got up to the wall to get into Moyard Park, there was a square and it was lit up. And we couldn't get across the square because everyone who was sitting over at Spring Martin was firing into the square. And any time anyone would want to make a move, a shot was fired. We couldn't break the lamp. We weren't good enough stone throwers. And this fella came along and he says, tell us, what's the score, what's happening? And I said, we can't get across the square here because the place is lit up and there's a sniper. And he's just got the covered. It's like something you've seen in the picture. She says, right, that's all right. I'll send somebody round. Next thing, this young fella arrived round. He got about 14. He says, what do you want, mister? I said, we need that lamp broke. She says, that's all right. Bang. First brick through the lamp, pitch black, out we went, across the square.
Again, there was a fear that the soldiers had night sights and they could pick us up. So we started to slide across the field. I hadn't tried to get up at this time. I didn't know why I could walk or run or anything. And my brother got out first, and I, between stumbling and falling, I got out, pardon me, I got out too.
Everybody panicked and grabbed children, and we ended up with 2 or 3 children that we didn't even know whose they were. And we headed to Moyard.
When we got out of the field, I would say probably the worst gun battle I've ever heard, and all of the troubles erupted, because when the field was cleared of people, the IRA opened up from Moyard into Spring Martin at the paratroopers, and it seemed to go on all night. Maybe it didn't, but it seemed to go on all night. And I can remember distinctly they were using tracer bullets from Moyard. Every 3rd or 4th round was a tracer, so you could see it. After the burst of gunfire, every 3rd or 4th round was a tracer bullet. You could see that it actually shooting across into Spring Martin. We couldn't see the shooting coming back, but we could hear it from the paratroopers.
There were soldiers in the Vera Foster School, and there were soldiers on the other side, Spring Martin. And they were actually shooting through a block of flats, and they were actually shooting at one another, because the soldiers in Vera Foster were shooting at supposed targets here, and the bullets was going straight through and out the other side. And of course the soldiers over in Spring Martin could see this shooting coming through out of the building, and they thought they were being shot at from the flats. And they weren't, and they were shooting back in again. It was a madhouse.
But as I say, the gunfire was wild. I've never heard anything like it in my life before. It only lasted a short time, the real heavy firing. And I would have counted 400 or 500 rounds, you know, in that short space of time.
It must have been the third guy who went into the field was moaning. He was lying moaning. We could hear him. It was pitch black at this time. But obviously everybody was afraid to go into the field to get him out. But he was definitely alive. And the one thing I'll never forget was a girl who lived up around Springfield Park. I don't know her name. She had moved into Springfield Park. She had come down and we could hear this guy moaning. It was St. John's ambulance boy with us. And we were trying to decide what to do. And this girl arrives and she says, "Is there someone out in that field?" And she says, "Yeah, there's a guy there. He must be hit badly." And she says, "Well, go and get him." And she just took off. She went straight into the field. And quite truthful, we were afraid to move into the field. But the St. John's ambulance man went with her. And the two of them took him back out again. And he was badly hurt. We took a door off one of the garages in my yard and put him on the door.
Belly down. And we brought him round. I don't know where it was. It was a house or what it was. But I remember there was a nurse there, you know. And she says, "I don't think there's very much we can do for this fella."
Even when I got to the community centre, it was dark, but there's a lot of kids running about. We were hide and seek, annoying adults and that who were concerned about what's happening. You hear gunfire in the background.
Well, I was very worried. We were, you know, listening to the gunshots and everything else. I was trying to ring up my husband, but there was no answer. It was about 12:30 that night before he rang me up. So I knew he was all right, you know. But we had heard about the policeman shot and everything else, and people were saying, "You're lucky you aren't in that street now because it's terrible up there," you know. It was very worrying.
I remember crowds going out to check up behind the community centre. Biscuits and tea all night long. People being sick because it was just too much. Kids, you know, just going buck stupid. Me too.
There must have been about 8 children put into one bed. We had to sterilise one bottle to feed a few of them. Tear a few sheets for nappies, and it was very frightening because the shooting was still going on in the masonettes across. You could have seen the next morning, you could have seen the bullet marks and the washing on the lines, which was very frightening too.
It was here at this field at the rear of Springfield Park that Father Mullen was shot. He'd been in his home about 150 yards away when word reached him that a man had been shot and wounded in the field. Father Mullen immediately left his house and rushed to the scene, braving a hail of crossfire as he did so. Waving a white handkerchief, he approached the wounded man. But as he did so, he was hit by a burst of automatic fire. He fell and began to crawl away, but was hit again. First aid men who'd seen the incident rushed forward to help him, but the gunfire continued. And an 18-year-old youth, Francis Reed, who'd also rushed to the scene, was shot through the head.
I don't know how many were killed. I think there was about 6 killed in and around Springfield Park that night. I know my wife's aunt was shot dead on the Springfield Road. We believe she was coming up to us actually when the paratroopers shot her dead just at the bottom of Springfield Park there. They shot her from the Henry Taggart Hall.
She was looking for her children. She had a big family and she was rounding them all up. And there was somebody at the bottom of Springfield Park seen her that night getting shot. And she lay the whole night on the Springfield Road. And they came early in the morning and threw her into the back of a jeep.
The dead were brought here to the Army's makeshift barracks in the Henry Taggart Hall. Soldiers would clear up the debris, patch up the bullet holes, and turn the building into a permanent base. But nothing could repair the damage done to the community of Springfield Park.
The next morning we went back, you know, because everybody had been dispersed by that stage. And I remember the house a mess, you know, it was just constantly pelted stones, bottles, bricks, and the bin was in the window. The street was just littered.
Quiet as a grave. There wasn't even a bird chirping, or a stray cat. You always see a stray cat or a dog about the street. There was none. Even the dogs and the cats had a bit to get out.
I remember crying, adults crying, people saying cheerio, lorries coming in, some people getting stuff out, things like that there.
There was panic over it. Maureen Clark's. The word spread that her husband had been shot. And Father Mullen was given the last rites to her husband, and apparently he was shot.
The Red Cross couldn't get at him because they were pinned down by fire coming from the top of those houses, right? You know?
They were still flaking the field when he was lying dead.
Dead.
And nobody was
That's
there.
correct.
What happened whenever the Red Cross finally did get to him?
They fired on the Red Cross.
They fired on the Red Cross. They kept firing. The army says, lay still. They put out in the lead here, lay still or you'll be shot.
Well, we could hear it on the news. I think we'd got as far as Courtown, and we were putting the radio on all the time and listening to the news bulletins. And the woman in the next tent said, "Do you come from Northern Ireland?" And we said we did. She said, "Would that trouble be affecting you?" Well, I said, "Never before has it affected us, but it is obviously, because that priest that has been killed is the priest from our park just a few doors away."
When we come up again, there were already lorries and vans. People were there was an evacuation on, and I didn't know what was going to happen, one thing or another. It was turmoil just.
Well, people were saying, they weren't actually saying anything, you know, you'd see that they were deciding, will it go, will it stay, will it do this, will it do it. You just had to make your own decision, where you were going or where you were staying at it.
John Stewart was there. So he was. John was, you know, like, John was dead on, fella. He couldn't really, you know, he stayed as long as he could. He wanted to stay, you know. He knew the people that he had there would have protected him. That particular morning, he certainly was. He said to me himself when he was going, like, he says, there was boys came up in lorries, you know, to take the people out, and they were shouting about orange bastards, you know, which, you know, made you feel bad. Made me feel bad.
My wife had decided she wasn't going back to Springfield Park, and as far as I was concerned, I was dead on.
I remember a young lad coming to me and asking me, did I want my stuff moved out? Well, everybody else was moving. I said, where am I going to move to? He said, I'll put it in a Holy Child school.
All I remember was 3 of my brothers coming up in a big flat back lorry, you know, one of those coal lorries, like, and just come in, says to me, that's it, you're going. Just started putting the furniture out. Says, you're not staying here, you've got 3 kids, Ellie's in a bad state, and what have you, that's it, you know.
And I'm sitting in the lorry saying, I don't believe this. I mean, yesterday I was sitting in my own home, and now I'm in a lorry heading for, I don't know where I'm going, with my wife, and she was crying, sitting, of course. And I said, geez, you know, things can change dramatically in 24 hours.
We were getting very uneasy, and we couldn't really contact anybody at home to find out what was happening. So we just decided to drive straight home from Courtown. And we came up the Springfield Road, and unfortunately we couldn't go any further, so we decided to go to Jim's father's. And I jumped out of the car and into the house, and before Jim had even moved, his father wasn't very tactful. Maybe he didn't know how to put it to me, but he just said, have you been up yet? And I said, no. He says, well, you needn't go, you've no home.
Well, at that stage I broke down. So I did. Sort of I thought, it's gone, everything. Did work for him.
people were sort of clutching at straws, forlorn hopes. Could we not find another estate we could all move in together? Was a sort of the mood, you know. It was tremendous, so moving that, you know, the people were determined that we were all going to stay together and go through this. Some people played it with us, you know, that they had lived further down the park and hadn't been greatly affected by what had happened that night. I don't know what had gone on. I only had it from hearsay because we weren't there. And they were asking, could we not all come back? Come on, surely we can have another go at it. You know, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, they're going to do the other thing. But lots of us just weren't prepared to take a chance.
There was nobody about. There was nobody about. It was empty, deserted. There was a burning something. I remember something burning. Now, it wasn't a car. It was a barricade or something very near the house on the cul-de-sac. But I don't remember. I don't think it was a car because there wasn't too many cars in Springfield Park. If it was, it must have been stolen.
I would have liked to have gone back, but it was my husband's decision that no, we're not going back, because when he went back another day to get more furniture, that there had been an incendiary device put up in the roof space of 61 Springfield Park, and that was it. He made his mind up, that was it. Definitely we wouldn't be back.
Bobby Clark, in fact, when he ended up in hospital, somebody came up to clear his house out with a lorry. And the only thing we were after was his furniture. The poor man was down in hospital. I'm not going to say he's fighting for his life. It wasn't life-threatening, but he was seriously injured. And there was these jokers up looking to clear the house out.
Our front door was off. You could see right through. The stair carpet was gone, and the various everything was just rifled, completely rifled. Plants out of the garden were taken. The rose bushes were taken. I went into the hall, came out again, and just went away.
The street was dead. The mayor was dead because people, all right, there's people still there, as far as I know, people still there to this present day, but there was no atmosphere anymore. There was never any activity. I'd never seen, whenever you always come into that street, it was always kids, mostly mine. So they were always in the street, you know.
For several weeks after it, I would be asking the children where their mummy was and that there, and Dorothy used to go around and sit on the step of 124 Springfield Park and cry her heart out because of what she'd lost. And it wasn't the bricks and mortar that she was sitting on she'd lost, it was the life.
That was the end of life in Springfield Park for my family and for most of our neighbours at the top end of the street. Now began the search for alternative accommodation. Some people squatted, others stayed with relatives and friends. All returned to their respective traditions.
I had to go to my sister because they said the only way we would get a house would be if the family was broke up. So I had to go down then and stay with my sister down in Dublin. You know, that's my sister, she was killed with the bomb. So she was coming up to Belfast, you know, so we stayed down with her then, you know, for a while.
Those houses had been built in Crunchy Rise, and we went up to these houses. Well, there's one of the, suppose he was a watchman, come labourer, or whatever he was. When he came up, he was a countryman, and I thought it was a bit much like, but a towner. And he said to me, "You can't go in there." I said, "What?" So I took my boot and there was a pull on the bottom of the door. And I just stuck my boot through it and opened the door and went in, and then we all moved in.
Here we were back into a street that had no roads, there was no water in the houses, there was no glass in the windows, there was no electricity. There was a lot of the houses had no inside doors.
Well, I was worried having to squat because you didn't know what was going to happen and you weren't used to squatting. So you just had to put up with it, you know, but you hoped for the best.
Everything you'd known was now just vanished. And say it took a long time to realise you weren't going back. This was it. You were stuck here.
We didn't want to move. I put too much into the house just to walk away from it. I didn't want to have to go anywhere and try and take over somebody else's house by squatting or something like that. Some people were doing it, some people were advising you to do it, but All we had was there in Springfield Park.
My husband went back up again to Springfield Park, and he came back down about 2 or 3 hours later, and he says, we've got accommodation in Spring Martin. And I says, it's still a bit close, you know, to the Troubles, but I'll go and have a look at it and see. It was a flat. It was upstairs flat. And once I seen the bullet holes in the doors along, I says, definitely no. I says, I wouldn't be happy here. And then we got a house in Tullycarnet over East Belfast.
My wife and I decided to go to Holy Child School to see if where our belongings were. And there was an old shed, and it was lying kind of half out in a yard. And it was near like a rag store, but suddenly when going through it, we realised that it was our clothes soaking and wet. We lost a lot of stuff. Some of our stuff was pilfered while in Holy Child School. What, even to the present day, I couldn't remember. You know, some things we lost. We actually, after that, we were starting from scratch.
When you were away for a certain length of time, you realised that it would never have been the same anyway. Had everybody gone back, it would never have been the same. The damage was done. And I would say that, without a doubt, none of the Protestant people would have came back. So that aspect of it would have been gone.
I hate to say it, but I would never move out into a friend's area again. I would never be happy in a friend's area. I'm happy where I am now, and I suppose that contributes to it, that I know that I'm in an area where I'm safe enough. I'm not going to get put out again.
When the split came, when everybody decided to move, we moved to a nationalist area, and I'm sure that the Protestants moved to a Protestant area. So some of the families that we were really friendly with who were Protestants, we lost contact with them.
It's very sad about the whole lot. It's no use being bitter. I don't know, you're only being bitter, you're turning in on yourself, I think. So you have to learn to live with it.
It was a whole community of people just disbanded. That sort of thing too. And people lost track of people, like for years, that there had been ongoing friendships and whatever, for years.
Just wondered how many people did stay after I left. And I often thought to myself, should I go up? Should I drive up? Or would it be right? Or you don't know what they've been thinking. Maybe they put the past behind them, you know, you wouldn't know. I've met one or two over the years in town, in Belfast, but nobody sort of said, you know, come and visit me or what. We just, well, we'll see you again sometime. But that was it. Everybody seemed to be going on with their lives from the left. Springfield Park.
If moving out of Springfield Park was the end of the dream for many of the adults, for us kids it was the end of childhood. We realised somehow that our parents were vulnerable, that everything they'd worked for, no matter how hard, could be swept aside by these troubles. Still, we were fortunate. We'd escaped with our lives. We could go on to rebuild. This wall symbolises the divide that Springfield Park once bridged. It looks like it'll last longer than the homes it replaced. If Protestants and Catholics are to live together as neighbours in an area like this, it'll take a lot more than physical walls to come down.
The people need to come together. They really do need to come together and you know, forget that what you are, what you aren't, and be like what we were in Springfield Park in the 60s. You know, we were getting home for our children, wanting to rear our children up and, you know, do as well as we could for our children. And I feel if people would take that attitude, that this would be a far better country. You know, because it's not getting us anywhere fighting. It really isn't. It's causing bitterness. And I thank God that I have Springfield Park, and I think it was the making of my character that I did not turn into anything better, or, you know, I could live with all creeds or whatever. You know, they have a right to live and I have a right to live, and that's how I see it. And I just wish the future for my children, my grandchildren, could be as happy as I was in Springfield Park.